What's up, guys? Hope you had a good weekend. I did. Took my daughter off to university on Saturday, so that was a big emotional moment, but the weather was awesome. We generally had a good weekend. I hope you did too. But now I've got loads of questions to get through, so welcome to another Ask Elvis. So yeah, really cool weekend. As I say, quite emotional in sort of saying goodbye to my eldest daughter, Lexi. She really has sort of flown the nest this time, probably for good, which is a difficult thing to do when you're a parent, as I'm sure lots of you will have already been through, or maybe even been through this weekend. Anyway, hope your weekend was good, whatever you were up to. But as I said, we've got loads of questions as ever, so we're going to start and crack through some of those now. I'm going to start with this one, which comes from Chip Rockets. Chip Rockets says on Twitter, "Hi Mark, love the show. Could you explain why designs which push the rules, for example double diffuser, mass damper, etc., get banned by the FIA? It seems like stunting progress in a reactionary way. How do they decide which novel ideas get to grow and which have to go?" Right, so decent question. And actually it's something that lots of people over the years have questioned, have asked. Should we not be letting these amazingly inventive ideas flourish and be developed in the platform of Formula One? The main reason anything like this gets banned, things like double diffusers for example, is that it becomes a hugely expensive area of development which only perhaps the top teams can really afford to exploit. And the other thing is that lots of these types of inventions end up making the cars just simply too quick. And that might seem like a really sort of contradictory thing to say in Formula One, but the cars, of course, can get too fast for the circuits or for the tyres that are available at that particular era. Circuit runoff areas, circuit barriers, you know, crash impact protections, those kind of things are designed to work at certain speeds and certain impact forces and those kind of things. If the cars start getting drastically quicker than the original design specifications, well then you can start getting into issues with that sort of stuff too. So those are typically the reasons. It's normally about cost or it's about safety, which is why they get pegged back. But I kind of agree with you. From an engineering perspective, of course, it's always great to just see the engineers go wild in F1 and come up with the very best designs, the most creative designs possible. I would love to see that too. Right, and while we're talking about safety, there's another one here which is quite interesting from lstatistic.se. Thanks for your question. It says, "Great show, Mark. Regarding the fatal crash in Spa and dangerous track re-entries in Monza, should racing cars employ auto braking if the car in front crashes? The sensors needed are already in place." And somebody else asked me this a while ago at an event I was at. Could that technology not be implemented that we already see in road cars, actually quite successfully in road cars, quite advanced in road cars as well? Could it be employed in racing cars? And the answer to that is probably it could somehow. I mean, not in the same way that it is on the road cars, because of course the whole idea with a racing car is that you are going to brake incredibly late and you're going to run incredibly close to the car in front. So it's not exactly the same thing. But potentially there could be something that just automatically slows every racing car when there's a serious incident on the circuit. And that could be implemented by the FIA, by race control. You know, a little bit like you get at go-kart tracks where someone flicks a switch and all the karts go down to half speed. There is nothing to say that that sort of system couldn't be implemented somehow in Formula One. We're at the pinnacle of technology. We can do almost anything with the technology that we have. So I think it's an interesting concept and one that shouldn't be ruled out. Yes, it goes against everything we've known in Formula One up until now, but it doesn't mean it should never be implemented or never even be considered. So yeah, good point. This next one comes from the Gingerbread Man on Twitter. He says, "A contemplation on Vettel. Is it possible that this generation of cars simply isn't as compatible with Vettel compared to his championship-winning Red Bull years?" Yeah, that's entirely possible. And I think this is underestimated quite a lot. I mean, obviously with Vettel's championship years, particularly in the double diffuser era, wasn't it? Both him with his driving style and Red Bull with their technology just absolutely nailed it. It took a unique way of driving those cars, and Vettel managed to develop that within himself, or it certainly suited his way of driving. And of course Red Bull got the technology absolutely spot on. So they absolutely dominated in that era. And but actually I think there's a big point to play here, or to talk about here, where cars suit certain driving styles. And it's very easy to say, well, the best drivers should be able to adapt to anything. I mean, yes, to a certain extent that's absolutely true, but you know, we've seen drivers, great drivers, like Pierre Gasly's a good driver, came over to Red Bull, struggled. Albon has moved across to Red Bull, seems to be doing okay, and it's a lot to do with the way that the different cars behave, how they perform, you know, and the characteristics, the driving characteristics that they need to be quick. So I do think that's a big player in the performance of Formula One drivers these days. There are two lakes where I live, very luckily. Beautiful lakes. This one is what we call the bigger lake, and then there's the smaller lake on the other side. The smaller lake has been utterly taken over by some massive filming project, and it is huge, like a monster movie. They've shut it down, they've lifted out all the planting and trees around the edge of the lake and replanted a bunch of tropical trees to make it look like some kind of jungle scene, all for one day's filming on Thursday this week. I've no idea what the movie is because they'll never tell you, it's always top secret, but my money is on Bond. Right, this question comes from Monster Matty on Twitter. He says, "Hi Mark, on power tracks like Spa and Monza, Renault did quite well. Chassis aside, does this suggest their power unit is approaching parity with Honda?" So Renault did do very well on those circuits. There was always predicted that they probably would do well, and part of the reason for that, at least, yes, their engine has definitely taken strides in the right direction, but part of the reason for that, of course, is they have this low downforce approach, like the Ferrari. If you remember right back at the beginning of the season, Alfa Romeo as well, of course, and they launched all the new cars, and I did a bunch of videos looking at them all. There's two basic camps, weren't there, in terms of front wing and aero design. There was a low drag philosophy where the front wings were very, very slim, very narrow, sort of tapering out towards the edge, just using the inboard part of the front flaps to generate downforce, and therefore creating a whole lot less drag than some of the others, like a Mercedes, for example, that have this big full width flaps on the front wing. So we all looked at that and thought, oh, who's going to get it right? Which of these concepts is going to be the one that's going to work over the season? Well, you come to places like Spa and Monza where it's all about dumping as much drag as possible, and of course those cars are optimised for those conditions. The Renault was definitely one of those. It's why we saw Ferrari doing so well. It's why Renault suddenly did so well. Alfa did well as well, typically in terms of their performance at least, or their pace. So it's no real surprise, but those concepts definitely worked at those type of circuits. When we get to places like Singapore, you would fully expect it to swing back the opposite direction, and those guys to perhaps be slightly on the back foot. So I think it's always very difficult to tell exactly where somebody's power unit is in terms of performance. And I know that teams use GPS to overlay their traces and sort of see what they're doing along the straights, and they get a pretty good idea from that. But because we've got such different aero concepts on different cars, that makes that process a lot harder to do, or a lot less accurate to judge from. So it's always very difficult to compare power units, but certainly the aero concept will have had a huge impact over the last two races. Vo Nelly on YouTube asked this one. I don't know if you've ever answered this question before, but why do the cars have to show the rear lights when they're harvesting energy? Doesn't it make it more unpredictable and fun when the drivers behind are kept in the dark? Well, I know that lots of you will already know the answer to this, but lots of you may not. So the lights come on, obviously the three red lights on the back of the car, as it is for this year, come on when the car goes into harvesting mode. And in technical terms, what that means is the MGU, the motor generator unit of the car, goes from generating power, so from pushing the car along, it switches into generator mode and starts slowing the car down, harvesting energy, like a dynamo on the back wheel of your bike, for example, when you're a kid. if you ever had one of those, that uses the motion of the car that's still travelling forward to turn that dynamo or that generator, and that then generates energy that goes back into the battery. But of course that process, because you're adding some resistance into the system, it slows the car down. And if you're following a car, that can happen before the typical braking zone that you would normally the car would normally slow when the driver hits the brakes. So if you're following closely, you do need to know that the car has gone into harvesting mode, because it could quite unpredictably start slowing where you would not normally expect it. So that is a safety thing. That's the reason it happens. Would it be more fun and unpredictable? Absolutely, if they didn't know that was going to happen, but also quite dangerous. This was quite an interesting one, I thought, from Andy James on YouTube. He says, "Hi Mark, why not have a system where the penalty for a driver is a reduction of the points earned for that race? So if, for example, and we're going back to Monza, if Charles were to be punished for his defence against Lewis, then his win points could be like 15 instead of 25. It would mean drivers don't race thinking, well, I've got to get out of jail free card for a dodgy move under braking." I think it's interesting. I don't think it's as simple as that, clearly, because there are so many reasons why that could actually provide more problems. First of all, only the top 10 drivers score any points at a race at the moment anyway, so that's not a fair penalty to apply across the field. It also would need to have some change like that. It would need the agreement of all 10 teams, and I don't think you'll ever get that. Also, things like that could potentially be putting the outcome of a championship into the hands of the stewards on the final day of the season. You know, something that's absolutely subjective. Do they decide to give a driver 20 points or 25 points for the win that could affect the title? Those things mean that I think it's probably impractical. But as a concept, to start talking about something like that, why not? In the future, if other things around that changed, that's not such a bad way to look at it. Penalise the benefit that you and your team would get from that race, rather than penalising something in the race that effectively nullifies the whole race itself. So, interesting concept, needs a bit of work though. Right, another one from YouTube. Gabby van Dinteren asks this regarding Formula E. Nick de Vries has joined the Mercedes Formula E team for 2020. All F2 drivers want to move to F1, right? So how big of a step forward is it for the current F2 driver leader, or F2 championship leader and probable world champion, to go into Formula E? And I think this is a really interesting point. So, to put that in a nutshell, if you're a driver, an aspiring young driver moving through the ranks, coming through Formula 2, surely your goal, your dream since you've been a very young kid, is to get into Formula 1. That's everybody's dream, isn't it? To get to the pinnacle of motor racing, Formula 1. And yet Nick de Vries, is in a situation where he's the best placed Formula 2 driver, so potentially next on the list of drivers that teams will be looking at to get into Formula 1, and yet he's chosen to go to Formula E. So what does that tell you? Two things, I think. First of all, he's chosen to go to Formula E with Mercedes, so he's in the Mercedes family, having a proper works drive with the Mercedes team under the leadership of Toto Wolff, where he will be assessed. He'll be in constant communication. He'll be part of that family, that that Mercedes family. That's a big step for any driver. And the other thing you've got to remember, which has become more and more apparent in recent years, is that the number of slots available on the Formula 1 grid are just few and far between. Drivers hanging onto their seats for years and years. Big driver programs, signing up young drivers, and if you're not in one of those, then maybe it becomes even harder to get a Formula 1 seat. And the other thing is that not every Formula 1 seat guarantees, a decent, well-paid drive. Lots of the Formula 1 seats, as we all know, you have to bring a huge amount of budget to that drive to secure it for yourself. Formula E, outside of Formula 1, I think is probably one of the only places where pretty much every drive or every driver has a very well-paid professional race seat. And that is something not to be sniffed at. Formula E is obviously huge, it's growing at a rapid rate, it's becoming more and more popular, there are more and more eyeballs on it. And so I think there's a lot to be said for putting yourself into that situation, particularly in the Mercedes team. The downside, as far as I can see it, with Formula E in terms of driver progression, is that it's a very unique way of driving a car. I don't think driving in Formula E necessarily sets you up for driving in Formula 1 or anything else. So is it a career stepping stone towards Formula 1, or is it an alternate path towards, you know, that could become somebody's end goal now? I think maybe that's more the case. Roman Wazarab asks this one. He says, the 2021 changes give Ferrari veto over rule changes. Right? He says, let them take their ball and go home then. We can do without them. Thoughts? This is an ongoing question, isn't it? So the 2021 rules or set of regulations that are being formulated right now, yes, it looks like they will keep, Ferrari might keep their veto. It's not a new rule, it's something that's always been there historically for Ferrari. They're the only team that can, if they want to, put a stop or stop a rule change from happening with their power of veto. It seems bizarre to me that that's still a thing, and certainly as Liberty are negotiating the next set of big reg changes, surely that should go. Now, we don't know for sure because we haven't got the set of regs or set of rules for 2021 yet. They need to be finalised by the end of October, and that's when we'll start to see them. So we don't know 100%, but yeah, in my book, 100% that should have gone. That's a sort of such an outdated, such an old rule that seems to have no place in modern top-level sport. And then somebody else put, and I can't find it, I'm afraid, on Twitter, I think it was, somebody else said to me the other day, if Ferrari have a power of veto in any of the rules, can't they put a stop to a rule that ends their veto? Interesting point. Right, I think that's got to be it today, guys. As I'm coming to the end of my dog walk, and Wilson here is desperate to play the pinecone game. So I need to get home. Thank you very much for all of your questions. I will be back, if not before, I'll be back on Thursday with the Singapore Grand Prix preview and another prize to give away. And this week, by the way, it's a bloody brilliant prize. You will not want to miss this one. Very, very cool. So in the meantime, thank you again. Appreciate it. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're new. I'd really appreciate it. And give the video a thumbs up and a like if you liked it. And I'll see you very soon. Cheers, guys.